Hey guys, so this is the second time filming this video because the first time it wasn't in focus, so hopefully now it is. Two quick notes before we start. First of all, I got a lip piercing and my lip is swollen, so I'm kind of lispy. Second of all, I decided to sit down and film, so everyone's fucking banging their shit or whatever. So, sorry about the background noise, but the windows are closed, everything's closed, and this is the best I can do at the moment. Okay, so moving straight into the story. This is not clickbait, unfortunately, I wish it were. So, this all started when I was in my high school in Shanghai, China. So I would strongly recommend you watch the video I made about that high school just so you get context and kind of like an idea of what the setting was like, and I'll link that below. But pretty much I moved from my school in Switzerland to my school in China in the middle of 11th grade, and I was doing the full IB, and if you don't know what that is, it's like IB is like AP, except that IB lasts 2 years, and in my case I was doing full IB, so all of my classes were IB, so it's like having all AP classes for 2 years. And that's a pretty intense kind of curriculum, so moving in the middle of 11th grade is a pretty significant thing in terms of that, especially since every school has their own timeline, so for example, in my school in Switzerland, in history, we were still in the 1800s when I moved, and then in the school in Shanghai, as soon as I got there, they were in World War II, so significant time gaps. So the way teachers went about what they were teaching is completely subject to each school. So what I was studying in Switzerland was not what they'd be studying in Shanghai, so when I got there, it was kind of a mess. Now, the teacher I'm going to be talking about, Mr. This is the second time I almost said his name. Mr. Jerkface, he was my math teacher, and quick note about math, I've almost always been pretty horrific at math, except for at the beginning of 11th grade, I got a really good teacher, and he was really funny and just like really supportive, and I was actually acing math at that point. So when I moved, I had an A in math, okay? So I immediately got bad vibes from Mr. Jerkface. I literally don't know what it was, but as soon as I went in, I already mentioned in the other video how I felt just like this horrible weight on my shoulders when I was in that school, because it was really cutthroat. But he just made that weight heavier. It's just like I felt like he had judged me as soon as I walked in, and that was just such an uncomfortable position to be in. Like, it felt like he already thought I was a fucking idiot. And he had no reason to think that because I had an A before. Like, he doesn't know my whole life story, but, whatever. So, as soon as I get into Mr. Jerkface's class, this is my first day, and I have a small notebook because I hadn't had time to go full-on school shopping for new stuff because I didn't know what we needed yet, because they hadn't told me. I didn't even have their syllabus, so it is what it is. So I went in and I had this small notepad, and I'm going about, business as usual, writing down the notes he has on the board or whatever, and then in the middle of writing stuff, he turns and looks at me and he's just like, "Your notebook is too small." And he was on the other side of class, so everyone turned around and looked at me, and I was like, "Okay, I'll get a new one tomorrow." And he's like, "Didn't you know what kind of format you needed for this class, blah blah blah." And I was like, "I literally walked into this class half an hour ago, okay? Before that, I didn't even know your name. No information was given to me except for my schedule, okay? I don't have any of the syllabi I need to have, so chill, dude." But he was just so fucking cold and so pissy about such a small thing that I was like, okay. He did kiss the students' ass, though. Some students that were obviously, really good students, he was, really kissing their asses. Anyways, so this is my first experience with him. As time went on, I realized that he did not like me whatsoever. And, you're allowed to feel the way you feel, but when you're a teacher, you shouldn't actively be be actively obvious about disliking someone or really liking someone, They usually want you to be impartial. So, at multiple moments in this class, I felt super uncomfortable because I am not a math-minded person. And by that I mean that oftentimes I would find answers to things in a different method. And I know that sometimes using different methods won't always give you the right answer. But most of the time the different methods I had weren't really that different. I just thought about it differently than the way he framed it, if that makes sense. Since I'm more creatively inclined, I liked to kind of picture things in my mind in a way where I could visualize how it was and how it would make sense to me. So one day I solved a problem in this alternate fashion, let's say. And I was always scared to, speak in that class because he always just looked at me like I was a fucking idiot. So for once he asks like, hey, how do you solve this or whatever? And this was like one of the few and only times I raised my hand. Getting goosebumps talking about this stresses me out. So I raised my hand and I was like, this is the answer I got. And he's like, okay, that's the right answer. How did you do it? And so I explained how I did it and he's just like, that's not how you do it. And I was like, well, this is how I found the answer, just because this is how I did it. Like, I realized that there are multiple formulas. This was one of the things that had multiple formulas, so it wasn't like I just like pulled it out of my ass, like I just had used a different formula. He's like, why didn't you use the book's formula? And I was like, for me, it's easier to use this formula just because I understand it better. Like, I don't get caught up in the numbers and just like forget what the fuck I'm doing. This makes more sense to me. And he was like, you can't use that. And I was like, okay. And then he's like, let me just ask someone else since you didn't find the answer the correct way. Let me just ask someone else. And he just like erased my answer from the board and like talked to someone else. And I was like, okay. So that didn't really feel that great. And there were multiple other instances like that where he just made it very obvious that my opinion meant jack shit. So I stopped talking. And I pretty much went mute in that class. I felt stupid. He didn't really care to make me feel better. And I got a tutor because I wasn't doing well in that class anymore. Like, I think between me being depressed and anxious and not liking him and feeling stupid, I just, like, my grade fucking plummeted in that class. So I got a math tutor, and this math tutor happened to be the head of the math department at my high school. So it was great. Like, she was nice, and I was, like, really working hard to get better, and I was, like, staying after school to, like, spend some time with her and work on problems and all that, and, I was really fucking trying. So, towards, I think, the middle of the second year, we had this thing called an internal assessment. So what an internal assessment is pretty much a paper that you write in math about how you solve a math problem. So the prompt would be, solve this problem, show how you did it, okay? And I think it was like a 10-page thing. And obviously I wasn't allowed to talk about it with my tutor or my mom or anyone else. So I didn't talk about it to anyone until it was over and handed in. So I, as always, did this a different way than the rest of the class. I don't remember, I used like some formula and I used like Excel and stuff like that to find the answer. And other people in my class used matrices. Everyone in my class. I was the only person who did something different. So you're supposed to hand in your notes with this. So I handed in my notes, but most of my notes were screenshots of what I did on Excel, so they weren't like handwritten, okay? Although there were some handwritten notes. And I hand them in, and the same day that I hand them in, like 20 minutes into the class, my teacher goes outside the door, then he's like, Julia, I need to talk to you. And then everyone turns to look at me and be like, this bitch is in trouble. And they were right. So I go outside and I'm like, what's up? And he's like, I looked over your internal assessment, your IA, and this doesn't seem like your language. And I was like, excuse me? And he's like, yeah, like, do you have more notes? And I'm like, well, most of the stuff I did, I showed you via the screenshots on Excel, because really that's all there is to show for it, because, like I said, I used Excel. That usually is pretty self-explanatory. And he's like, so you don't have any other notes? And I'm like, no, this is the entirety of what I did is shown here. And he's like, yeah, this just doesn't sound like your language. Did you have someone help you do this? And I was like, no. And then he's like, well, I don't believe you did this by yourself. And I was shook. I was so shook. And I was so scared because I was like, this guy does not like me and now he thinks I cheated. Like, he's gonna try and get all my shit fucked up. And the thing is, like, obviously, cheating is never taken lightly, but when it's in a 2-year program, it's like it deletes everything you've done if you cheat. So I was like, first of all, I didn't cheat, but second of all, if it's a teacher who doesn't like me, who's trying to assess whether I've cheated, that scares me. So I come to find out that he tells me that he wanted to have a meeting at lunchtime. So I was like, okay,
I need to stop this because there's a huge spider and I'm gonna need to get rid of that. Hold on.
It's gone. So he tells me he wants to meet up at lunchtime to discuss this with the head of the math department, my tutor. Okay, so I felt a little relieved because I was like, okay, my tutor's gonna be there. She knows I'm not like a bad kid or whatever. So I'm nervous until lunchtime. I feel like I'm gonna vomit. I'm scared. I'm just kind of like shit, you know? So I go to this meeting and my math teacher and my tutor are seated behind his desk and I literally feel like I'm in court and I've killed someone or something. So I find out that my paper was not run through anything like turnitin.com, like there was no checks for plagiarism. So imagine you're telling me I plagiarized or I didn't do it by myself, but you have no proof or no reason to really doubt that apart from the fact that you think I'm a fucking idiot. So I sit down and he's like, I don't believe this is your work. And I said, yeah, you already told me that. And he's like, okay, so explain everything you've done. So after writing a 10-page paper, it asked me to explain what I wrote in the 10-page paper. So I explained everything step by step. Now I could tell my tutor was, impressed, or at least she believed me because I saw her nod and be like, yeah, like everything she said has made sense so far. However, Mr. Jerkface just stayed straight-faced, like complete poker face, and that really worried me. And so after I explained everything, it seemed like he wanted to find something, like he wanted me to fuck up. Like he kept asking redundant questions that I had already answered, but he just used different words. So like, I would have already explained everything, and then he'd be like, on page 6 you use the term blah blah blah, what does that mean? And I define the term, and then he'd be like, well, on page 7 you use this term, what does that mean? And I already would have explained it in my like entire explanation, but he kept asking, trying to knock something loose, I don't know, trying to find something that would make me seem guilty. Unfortunately for him, that didn't work. So once I was done, he was like, okay, thank you for coming in. So pretty much they left me fucking hanging. And I remember that night I went to bed so fucking terrified that everything I'd worked for had just like gone, because a teacher suspected something and had no proof. So I remember I told my mom about this, and she already wanted to report him to like the board of like American schools or whatever, because like his behavior, according to her and me, was just like completely inappropriate and unnecessary. Like if anything, he was more like a bully than a teacher. And in that class, I honestly felt like my self-worth in that class was so low. Like I honestly felt like I didn't deserve to breathe when I was in that class, and that is not an exaggeration. Like I would go in there and I would sweat because I felt so fucking terrible and so stupid and so unworthy. So the next day, he tells me that he's gonna, submit it, that apparently I'm not in trouble. And from the way he said that, I gathered that my tutor and like the head of the math department thought I was innocent, and he obviously still thought I was guilty because he seemed like really pissed that I didn't get in trouble for something I didn't do. But anyways, like the real thing about this whole video is that teachers have such a huge impact on students. And just to kind of illustrate that, since this happened to me in 12th grade, I have avoided math to the death. And it's like, apart from not being good at it, I just used to be not good at it, and I didn't really, it didn't scare me, it didn't make me feel like shit, it didn't make me feel stupid. But after him, it really made me feel that way. And to illustrate that, I went 4 years in college without taking math. And that might sound impossible, but actually it's really possible. All you have to do is take ecological science, because for me that counted for math, philosophy, because that counted for math. Like I took a bunch of classes to specifically avoid ever being in that position again, because I felt so fucking terrible with Jerkface. So I think he still works there, and, to be fair, they have a lot of terrible teachers at that school, so I'm not even surprised. But, I mean, as someone who wants to potentially become, like, a college professor, everything this guy did just made me so much more aware of everything that's wrong with teachers who are like that. And the shitty thing is that I feel like I'm probably not the only one who's experienced that specifically with him, and obviously I'm not the only one who's experienced it in the world. I'm sure a lot of people have. So yeah, I guess this video is about my experience with a teacher who actively wants to see you, like, fail. So yeah, if you like this video, cool. If you want to share any stories or anything like fucked up that's happened to you with a teacher, you should comment it below because I'm definitely curious to know like what other people have gone through. And yeah, I hope you enjoyed this video.